This is the VOA Special English Health Report. The United Nations estimates that the world reached 7 billion people on October 31st. But no one can be sure. The United States Census Bureau does not expect the 7 billionth baby until March. Populations are growing faster than economies in many poor countries in Africa and some in Asia. At the same time, low fertility rates in Japan and many European nations have raised concerns about labor shortages. Population experts at the United Nations estimated that the world reached 6 billion in October 1999. They predict 9 billion by 2050 and 10 billion by the end of the century. China's population of 1.33 billion is currently the world's largest. India is second at 1.2 billion. But India is expected to pass China and reach 1.5 billion people around 2025. India will also have one of the world's youngest populations. Economists say this is a chance for a so-called demographic dividend. India could gain from the skills of young people in a growing economy at a time when other countries have aging populations. But economists say current rates of economic growth, although high, may not create enough jobs. Also, the public education system is failing to meet demand, and schooling is often of poor quality. Another concern is health care. Nearly half of India's children under the age of 5 are malnourished. Sarah Crow at the United Nations Children's Fund in New Delhi says these two problems could keep India back. The malnourishment means many children are unable to grow to their ability in school and later to earn money and pay into the economy. 1 of every 200 million children who start school, she says, only 10% complete grade 12. Mikhail Rakowski is the Director of Human Development in South Asia at the World Bank. He says the 7 billionth person was likely to be a girl born in rural Uttar Pradesh. Uttar Pradesh is one of India's poorest and most crowded states, with nearly 200 million people. He says reaching 7 billion people in the world is a good time for a call to action. He says public policy needs to become really serious about gender equality and about access to services. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Presutti. Check out voaspecialenglish.com, VOA's daily source of news and information for people learning English. You can also find lessons on the VOA Learning English page on Facebook. This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. Representatives of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank met in Washington in late April. This was the last time Robert Zoellick attended the spring meetings of the two organizations as the World Bank president. Earlier, Jim Yong Kim was officially chosen as the bank's 12th president. Mr. Zoellick said developing countries are now engines of growth. Developing countries have provided 2/3 of global growth over the past 5 years, he said. But he added that many developing nations still face big problems. He said all members need to work together better for their common interest. The United States traditionally chooses the World Bank head, and Europe chooses the IMF chief. But developing nations want more influence. The World Bank is a development agency. The IMF supports monetary cooperation and provides loans. IMF chief Christine Lagarde announced that the fund had received promises of over $320 billion to help nations in trouble. She also said developing nations need to do more to support their emerging markets. They too have to address some of their issues, she said. They too have to be very attentive to a volatile market situation. And that means, for some of these emerging markets, refocusing on their domestic growth. Ms. Lagarde said emerging markets need to work toward growth and building demand. But that requires resources. Two issues are access to banks and safety nets. The World Bank says 3/4 of the poor have no access to banks. That means no savings in their communities to finance growth. The problem is greater for women. Poor women are 28% less likely to have bank accounts than poor men. Social programs are also needed. 60% of the developing world cannot depend on social programs to protect citizens from hunger or to provide services in crises. Mr. Zellick said, to help the poorest, every country needs basic safety nets to deal with crises. Because the other lesson we learned, he said, is if you wait until a crisis, it's too late. And rich nations have a lot to learn from developing ones. Mr. Zellick said programs in Brazil and Mexico are not costly, but help millions. Finally, the World Bank Group welcomed its newest member, South Sudan. The nation received its first grant of $9 million. The money is to help create jobs and provide financial services. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Presutti.